We'll make a start, and if someone joins late, we can deal with that. So good afternoon, and first of all, thank you very much for coming along to this short conversation. My name is Robert McIntosh, and I'm the workstream lead for workstream 2 of a thing called the EDI Caucus, which I'll say a little bit more about in a moment. But just as we're starting, the EDI Caucus has a code of conduct around its meetings, and we want these meeting spaces and the various seminars and events that we run to feel like a safe and inclusive space for everyone. And I'm sure that Fenella will share the link to the website with the code of conduct on it at some point during our conversation. But it is just to say that you're very welcome to have your camera on or off as you see fit. And if you have accessibility issues in terms of using your microphone, or you don't feel you're in a space or a place where you can speak, you can use the chat facility to ask questions should you want to. And just in the
just as a note that we are recording this, so if you would like to sort of keep your camera off, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, as Fenella says, we are recording, and that's it was recording just as you joined. So if for some reason that's troubling to you, you're very welcome to dip out, and you can reach out to me independently, and we can have an offline conversation. And I was just going to go on to say that in the unlikely event that there is anything that somebody would find inappropriate or offensive, we do reserve the right to remove people from the digital space so that it continues to be a safe and inclusive space for those of us that are here. And I'm sure, or I'm hopeful that that won't be the case, but that's all set out in our code of conduct, which we will happily share with you. So I'll say just a little bit about the EDI Caucus as a whole, and then a little bit about the call that we have placed that you've expressed an interest in around our equity champions, as we've called them. So the EDI Caucus is funded by a range of the research councils through UKRI and the British Academy, and we're working over a period of 3 years to 2025, the end of 2025. And the funding was allocated in 2 pots, and it's worth just noticing the design of the caucus is different than many other forms of research projects supported by UKRI. So there is a chunk of funding which was allocated to support the caucus directly, and that has configured itself around 3 work streams, one of which, workstream 2, I'm responsible for with Clayton McGill, who I know is on this call, and Stephanie Schneider, who is also on this call. And in workstream 2, our particular focus is on, I would describe it as the exercise of academic or scholarly judgment. And we're particularly interested in the ways in which, for example, when you bid for research funds or research grants, those are evaluated by often your peers, often in an anonymous way, or when you submit an article for peer-reviewed publication, that the editorial process for the journal that you might have submitted to will involve colleagues reviewing your work. And our sense is that there is a relative lack of maturity about the way in which EDI considerations play out in those kinds of circumstances. And we're therefore interested in doing some research to understand what good practice might look like, and then beyond that, to look at what good practice looks like in practice. And so the research project that we're leading, Workstream 2, will use a participatory action research method to take advice from the literature and to work with people in practice to try and enact that advice, reflect on what works well and not so well about that advice, and then to refine the advice and guidance that we give to the broader community. It's also worth saying that the caucus is deliberately looking at the research and innovation landscape and careers in both the research and innovation space. And I work in a university, and I know many people on the call will work in universities, and lots of research and innovation and knowledge exchange happens in universities. But lots of innovation happens beyond universities, in the private sector and in public sector organizations that undertake research and innovation. So, in pharmaceuticals and a range of different settings, people are involved in research careers which aren't actually in universities. And so our work and our advice about EDI concerns in the career in research and innovation needs to span both higher education and not higher education. And it is really that focus on EDI concerns or characteristics as they play out in those processes where academic or intellectual judgment is being used to decide what to do, what to publish or what to fund, and then how those connect to people's career experience and how we make careers in research and innovation, regardless of where one works, more inclusive, and to engage a more diverse community of scholars and researchers and innovators in those careers, and to get a more diverse set of people into those careers to support them better when they're in those careers, and therefore to end up with better research and better innovation. That's the funders' motivation for supporting the caucus, a desire to see more and better diversity of views and insights and individuals in careers in research and innovation in the UK landscape. Some of that research might be best informed by looking at places beyond the UK, but I would suspect that many of the projects and areas where we will work will end up being in the UK. Having said that as an introduction, why are we looking for a community of equity champions? Well, we're looking to draw together a representative group that covers both that research and innovation space that I've referred to, that maybe covers different career stages, and in particular covers different disciplinary areas. So we're looking for a group of about 40 equity champions to work with us over the next 2 years as our research moves forward. And my ideal would be that on a variety of different criteria, they represent a diverse group. And that's everything from it not all being engineers or scientists, or it not all being humanities or social science researchers, it not all being university researchers, but also including commercial or public sector organizations where innovation is the focus rather than research, a mix of early career and later career people, and a mix of different methods and settings and so on. And our intention as we get towards the end of this calendar year, we'll have completed an evidence review of what the literature tells us about EDI considerations in those processes of academic judgment. And we'll therefore be in a position to offer some advice as to what we think might help improve outcomes and experiences on the basis of that evidence review. And working with this group of equity champions that you've expressed an interest in being part of, we would look to offer you some advice and some training or development, but then also to work with you to evaluate how that unfolds. So let's just use one illustrative example, and I do really mean that it is an illustrative example, but let's imagine that you were responsible for the editorial process of a journal, or that you were responsible for a research team in a research lab or something of that sort, and we offer you some advice. And on the basis of that advice, you begin to change your practice. Our intention with the Equity Champions is to use video diaries as a method to capture before, during, and after experiences of receiving, then enacting that advice. And the video diaries just offer us a really, hopefully, quick, accessible, and convenient way to say, well, we sent you some advice on how to review these grant applications that you're about to review. And we wanted to catch your views as to what you thought of that advice before you started it. We'd like you to upload some video reflections as you're doing that work. And then maybe after it's completed, we'll come back and ask another set of questions as to how was that for you. And as we do that with a group of people engaged in the same process, we'll get a diversity of views. And on the basis of that, we might be able to refine the advice. So, for example, I have a suspicion that one of the things that we might do is say, here is a lengthy set of criteria that you should consider in making your decisions. And of course, with any lengthy set of criteria, it's easy to write them. It's much harder to find the time to read them, and they might be much more complicated to enact when you actually try to do so. So that participatory action research approach of trying and reflecting on what works and why will allow us to refine the advice and to gradually have more and more influence and impact from the advice that we give to the whole of the research and innovation ecosystem. And in that context, and then I'll stop and answer any questions people might have, in that context, we've put out a call, and I'm really delighted and grateful to you for expressing an interest in that call, to become one of our equity champions. And as we move towards the end of this calendar year and into the beginning of the new calendar year, to begin to work with us to try learning from the literature and from good practice that we find in the research councils or elsewhere, trial things, help us refine that advice, and then help us cascade that advice out through your networks, your institutions, your practice, your research colleagues, so that we begin to have a positive impact on the careers of colleagues in our field. So that this session and the one next week, which will be the same, is really just a chance to say a little bit about this mysterious idea of becoming an equity champion and what it might involve, and to answer any questions that you might have. And I go back to my opening remark that if you feel able to ask a question directly, you can just put your microphone on and or your camera. If you feel uncomfortable for some reason doing that, you can use the chat facility. And if you feel uncomfortable doing that, you're always welcome to just drop myself or Fenella an email directly, and we'll do our best to answer you. We'll probably put together some frequently asked question type responses from this and next week's session. And I hope that that has given you a little glimpse as to what the project involves and what might be involved from your perspective. It would not be a role which would be remunerated. It would not be a role, I hope, which would be a heavy call on your time. But it might be the kind of thing where actually I would hope you feel you're learning something and that you're having an influence on developing positive, developmental, inclusive advice that makes a difference in the world. And at that, I'm going to stop, and I'll just check in on the chat facility as well. And I'll very happily answer any questions. And colleagues from the EDI Caucus who are on the call, Clayton, Stephanie, Fenella, if there's anything that you feel you want to add, please feel free to do so. So does anybody have any questions that you would like to ask? Hi, Alejandra.
Oh, thank you. I mean, can you hear me well?
Yep, I can hear you just fine.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, just a question about the process in itself, because I mean, thank you for the presentation. It sounds all very interesting. It's very timely, I guess, to start reflecting on all the work that has been done in the EDI space, and now become very proactive in doing evaluations and making sure that everything that is being done delivers the benefits that we expect to deliver. So in terms of this process in particular, have you decided then who are the champions that you want to bring together, or this was an expression of interest and then there will be a process whereby you decide?
Great question. And first of all, thank you for your interest. We haven't finalized the group yet, and it's a slightly challenging and in some ways uncomfortable place for us to sit, because in forming the group, we're going to try to make sure that it represents the diversity that I sketched out earlier, that it covers both research and innovation and disciplines and a range of EDI characteristics and career stages. And if everybody on this call happened to be in, let's say, clinical research inside universities, I might have to say, I'd like some other voices in the Equity Champion group. So when the call closes, we'll go through that process of trying to identify a group which looks diverse enough for our purpose, for the research project. And I suspect, Alejandra, what will happen is that we will have a group of people who might be friends of the EDI Caucus who are not in that core group of 40 in order to make sure that that group is suitably representative, but are still interested. And I'd be very happy to have a group of people who continue to get updates from us and might work with us in different ways over the period. It's also worth saying that the funding mechanism for the caucus, as I said earlier, has this core funding for the EDI Caucus team. And actually the majority of the money is spent through what's called the Flexible Fund. So there's a call just now for Flexible Fund activity in Workstream 1. And there will be another call soon for Flexible Fund activity supported around Workstream 2. And so there may well be people who have an interest who don't make it into that final cut of the 40 for a variety of reasons, but I am sure there'll be lots of opportunity for people to continue to contribute to the caucus and to benefit from the findings of the caucus. And the purpose of this session was just to allow people to know a little bit more about who was involved, what might be involved. And I would say, in all honesty, it's not a very prescribed or set thing. Actually, we want to try and identify people who are enthusiastic and interested in doing this work with us. And as we identify that group, we'll talk to you as a group about how frequently we might meet, what we might ask you to do, what you think is reasonable, what you're interested in, and what you think the key issues are, so that we're in a dialogue where we're listening and learning deliberately from a diverse set of starting points and working collaboratively in a way which feels appropriate. So I hope that answers your question, Alejandra. Julie, can I come to you next?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi there. Thanks, Robert. That was really, really useful and clear, I think. In fact, I wonder whether you might have just answered my question, but what the question that came into my mind is that I understand, I think, your sort of theory of change, how you're sort of setting this project up and completely support the use of participatory methods. I think all of that is really clear. It wasn't clear to me how those experiences were identified. You know, you described kind of the set of experiences where you're trying to enact that advice and you used an example. Is that something, are those sets of experiences something that are identified by the group collectively so that they represent that kind of diversity of ways in which decision-making are being used in different settings? I suppose that was where I was going.
Yeah, a great question, Julie. And again, the entirely honest answer is that we are working knowingly with a relatively impoverished set of indicators. So in expressing an interest, we do ask you, would you identify as working in a university or in a private sector setting? And would you describe your career stage as what, and your disciplinary affiliation as what? And of course, I started out in engineering, but I've spent most of my working life as an academic in a business school setting. So that question is a slightly loaded thing. I still would identify myself as an engineer first and foremost, although I don't work in an engineering faculty anymore. What we don't ask for at that initial expression of interest is, do you have experience in an editorial role or in a research funding role? Would you identify with a disability? We don't ask a whole set of protected characteristic type questions of you, because I felt that wasn't really appropriate at this stage. So we will be trying to make a judgment about creating a community of 40 or so people who represent a range of different settings. And I guess there's a bit of a leap of faith on our part that people who come into that on a voluntary basis will have a predisposition to be interested in EDI issues, without necessarily saying that the representativeness of that group of champions is that X% of us meet this protected characteristic and Y% of us meet that protected characteristic. There is a commitment through the Flexible Fund that I just want to refer back to, which is we really do want to try and encourage people with lived experience of underrepresentation or marginalisation in commissioning work through the Flexible Fund. And there we would probably expect to see some self-declaration of, I'm interested in this thing which I experience in my own life, and that's how it informs the research that I want to do. But in screenings maybe, it's a sensitive but the right kind of phrasing. In screening or trying to identify a representative group of equity champions, we're deliberately not choosing to ask those quite personal questions at this stage. Does that make sense?
It does. I don't know whether, just to kind of clarify, I think I was maybe referring to how the types of activity would be identified amongst the group of champions. Yeah. I think you partly answered that. So, for example, how will you know that within your group of 40 you've got a set of people who are likely to be actively peer reviewing on a regular basis, or are likely to be making decisions about people's performance reviews and those sorts of things, or is that part of the leap of faith, I suppose, was the question.
It's probably a smaller part of the leap of faith, but by proxy, I would expect that if you're in a senior role, and if you're a research leader who's a PI or a promoted member of staff in a university setting, to use that as an example, you probably are in the situation where you oversee the futures of doctoral students, research associates, junior colleagues in your research field or lab or department. And you probably therefore are in the process of doing things like interviewing for new starts, promotions or PDA or annual review type conversations. You probably also do reviewing for journals and or for funding. And it would be really interesting to get a mix of those experiences. So I hope that answers your question. And I hope for others listening in on the call that it gives a sense of faith that we're not trying to be intrusive, that we are trying to hit the right sweet spot between making sure that we have a range of views and experiences in this core group. But that won't be the only way in which we access opportunities to do research in this space. We are in parallel talking with some editors of prestigious journals in a range of fields, and in parallel talking to research funders about calls or opportunities where we may be able to land on doing some intervention and or experimental or participatory research around a specific call, where we would work with that group from the point of view of commissioning the call, reviewing the bids, making the awards, and seeing how those awards play out in practice.
Robert, we've also got the stakeholder engagement groups.
Yeah.
And so that's a parallel recruitment that we've had to try and make sure that they aren't confused. And that is much more about the lived experiences. And in that one, we are asking, do you identify as disabled? What ethnicity would you identify, and all that kind of stuff. So we kind of have two different strands going at the same time.
Yeah. Thank you, Fenella. And thank you for the question, Julie. Are there any other questions that people have?
Alejandra's got her hand up.
That's a legacy, I think, from its being up originally, isn't it? From the look of horror on your face, I think that's what that was.
Yeah, so sorry. No, down. Thank you, Vanilla.
So there's another of these drop-in sessions next week, and we deliberately tried to pick 2 different days and 2 different time periods just to have an opportunity for a conversation.
While you're thinking, let me just share a slide really quickly to kind of show some other things. We're kind of cross-selling just a little bit here. So in addition, hopefully I can hit it right. We've got here different ways that you can participate. We've got a COVID-19 survey that's ongoing. We're hoping for another 100 or so responses. So even if you could just tap on 2 or 3 shoulders and get them to fill it out. Ironically, straight white men is one of the minorities that we're missing right now. And we've also got a call for reviewers for the Flexible Fund. So Robert has touched on that a few times. But we're looking for reviewers, and you don't have to necessarily be experienced. We're looking for PhD students, postdocs, all the way up to the very top. And we have an hour sort of guidance that we could provide, like a 1-hour guidance for people who haven't had experience with it before. And finally, we've also got a call for participants that's just launched yesterday. And we're trying to do some interviews with people who have experience of problematic menstruation and either perimenopause or menopause. And it's specifically looking at what kind of accommodations or changes in the workplace could be more accommodating for people who go through this. So I'm going to put them into the chat so you've got the links that are more easily clickable. And we are active on social media, sort of dipping our toe into blue sky, since Twitter is a little bit and we're also on LinkedIn, and it always helps when people share what we are sharing. So I'll pass it back over to Robert.
Thanks, Vanilla. And in true chat show host, you never miss the chance to plug your latest book or cross-selling opportunity. So there's lots of, the caucus is a big activity. It involves multiple universities and multiple commercial sector partners. As the Flexible Fund comes on stream, there'll be people from a range of wider institutions that will be doing research as part of the caucus. It's already quite a lively community, and I have a hope and an aspiration that over the next year or 2, it will grow and become an even more vibrant and more connected community. So please do take notes of these and engage in a variety of ways. Follow us on the various social media feeds, and if nothing else, we will take great solace from the fact that you're interested in us, but we'd really love to be working with you. Thank you for your time this afternoon. I hope that has been useful. There is no obligation to buy, and if this isn't for you and you think, nah, that was kind of useful, but I'm not sure that it sounds like it's for me, that's absolutely fine. But we will be writing back out to people once the call for expressions of interest has closed, to try and shape that core group of people that we want to work with over next calendar year for the 2 remaining years of the caucus, and hope to see some of you in that work. And if that's not for you, or for some reason that doesn't work out, I hope that there will be a community of people who are interested in what the caucus is doing and what it's finding, and who will continue to benefit from the insights from the caucus and help the caucus by sharing back with us your experience of trying to take ideas and good practice and make them live and breathe. And as you do that, helping us refine the advice that we give. It's a really important piece of work. It's intended to be co-production. It's intended to be engaging and thoughtful and reflective. And it will only be that if the community that's engaged in the work does genuinely engage and we learn from each other. So thank you very much for your time and attention on a Friday afternoon. I'm a big believer in trying to make sure that we finish on time. So at 13:59, thank you, Fenella, for setting the call up. Thank you, Clayton and Steffi from the caucus, for coming along. Thank you to 2 of my colleagues who I can see from Northumbria on the call at least. And I wish you all a very happy Friday afternoon and a great weekend when it comes round. And we hope that some of you at least will become involved in the EDI caucus in the months ahead. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.